everyone, this is Dr. Liz, and you're listening to Include with Dr. Liz. This show is about everyone, all people, including you. It's about people and their diverse lived experience in this world. I chat with guests to get to know them, their identities, and their inclusion needs, so we all have an opportunity to understand how best to include them, so together we can create a world where everyone thrives. Mel is a Netflix binging, decisive, LGBTQI plus identifying, personal development trainer with astute intuition. Identifying as a racial, cultural and religious minority, Mel is a grandmother to 7 and most proud of playing a role in the winning of marriage equality in Pennsylvania. Welcome, Mel.
Thank you so much for having me. That's a great little synopsis you put together.
Such a privilege to have you here today, because I actually now want to ask, what role did you play in winning marriage equality in Pennsylvania?
So I used to work for the ACLU, the American Civil Liberties Union, in Pennsylvania. And at the time, there was no marriage equality in like 3 of the states. So in Pennsylvania, the only way to win marriage equality, essentially, there was a lawsuit that the ACLU filed. So I'm not an attorney, but I ran the statewide public education campaign. So I met with folks across the state, trying to, as they say, change hearts and minds. And so once our lawsuit won, we wanted to make sure that there were, no follow up, no problems with lack of support. And so that was my role. And so we won cleanly. No one, the governor, everyone decided, like, yep, we're just going to go with it. And it was amazing. And the first time that I won myself out of a job, but the best reason to be out of a job.
Absolutely the best reason. I want to ask questions about that first.
Sure.
What did it mean to you? Right? So, you talk about how it was like an achievement to get to it, but why did that matter to you?
Well, as someone who identifies as a lesbian, and at the time, my wife and I, we were married. We had to go out of state to get married. It wasn't legal in Pennsylvania where we lived. And so, just having an experience where you are not recognized in the place that you live, the place that you work. My wife at the time was a police sergeant. Like, her job was to protect and serve, but yet the government wasn't protecting and serving us. And so to finally get to this space where not only, we won marriage, yay, but that there wasn't any fight, there wasn't any more arguing, there wasn't any more back and forth, at least within our state, was just, unbelievable. I probably cried for a week. So
You're making me well with tears now. Would you say that, and I'm not sure whether you were inferring it or I was just reading between the lines, that when you were saying that it was passed without that kind of extra pushback, did it kind of make it feel like maybe I am accepted now? Was there something more to that?
yeah, I think not just myself, but for every, gay couple in the state, right? Even single folks, right? I think it sent a pretty clear message that times were changing in our state, that, conversations had been had, people were listening. And even if there wasn't acceptance, there was not a fight anymore. People recognize that maybe even if I don't want to accept this is happening, it's not worth my energy to fight against it. Let people be who they're going to be.
Okay.
And, baby steps, I guess you got to start somewhere.
Yeah, true.
Yeah.
So since you worked so closely at that legislation level, at the state level there, how does it impact you when something at a federal level like Roe versus Wade happens?
Yeah. I mean, well, that could be a whole other episode of conversation. I think overall it sends this message that there are certain people who are deemed more important, more valuable in our society than others. It's unfortunate that in so many minority categories, laws were written specifically to keep us out, us, whoever those minorities are, right? And so when you think about it in those terms and you think about laws being created, and when you can just look at that from a very logistical, feelings aside perspective, you have to ask yourself, why are there laws written with only certain people in mind?
And often written by people with only certain things in mind.
Right. I mean, it's clearly the people in power writing these laws look a certain way, fit in certain categories. And the fact that if you're just talking about fairness, right, again, whatever perspectives aside, if you just look and say, well, why would there even be a law where only one or two groups of people are mentioned here, either for or against? How does that make sense? How is that fairness when there is this division? And it's unfortunate that a lot of laws, right? I mean, our Constitution was written that way. So it's going to take a long time for us to get to a point where I don't know that we're ever going to have fairness or true equality or equity across the board. It's going to be a long process. But for me, in all of my years of training, that's the thing that I really tried to harp on with people, right? When I was having these conversations across Pennsylvania, and people would come out and ask questions like, well, I don't even know gay people, which of course I would reply like, hi, I'm Mel and
Yeah.
I'm gay. But to be able to question it, to be able to have a conversation about these issues and about these disparities is where we have to start. And so it's hard for all of us, and I appreciate this podcast and bringing on all kinds of people to talk about these issues, because that's the only thing that's going to get us moving forward.
So you mentioned feelings aside. I want to
Yeah.
now put feelings back on the plate. And I want to talk about what happens in your household when there's stuff going on around you. And what I mean by that is when you hear about the Colorado Springs, for instance, shootings, or you hear about the Roe versus Wade and the conversation about marriage equality being back on or off the table. I don't know which way to put it. What happens in your household? What happens emotionally?
Well, by nature, I'm a very emotional person. Astrologically, I have many planets in Cancer, which means most of my life functions around emotion. So it's constantly a battle. Um, but it's interesting because right now in my household, it's just myself and my wife, who I mentioned is now retired police sergeant, and she's also a Black woman. And so even those issues of race and policing, we have had years of really deep conversations about what that means and what that looks like. And I'm so glad she's retired now, for so many reasons. But, in my circle of friends, which is very diverse, again, for me, we have these conversations and we cry together and we talk about, the unfairness and the sadness, and what does this mean for our children, what does this mean for my grandchildren. It's difficult some days. Honestly, it's difficult some days to get out of the bed. I had to limit my exposure to the news because I was overdosing on MSNBC for a while, and it just feels so heavy, to constantly just see people that look like you on television either dead
Mhm.
or having rights stripped away, or being told you're not allowed in a place, or you're not allowed to do a thing, or this isn't for you. I mean, it's just a constant
Unrelenting.
barrage.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and depending on how many of these categories you fit into, right? It's just another layer, another layer, another layer, that it's just, you have to find a way to swim every day.
Yeah. Let's turn that into something practical that we can give people. Let's take ourselves back a few years. to when the George Floyd protests were occurring. Now, we're not going to talk politics here. I just want to talk about how we support the human that's in front of me. So, if I'm in the workplace and it's Monday and those protests occurred over a weekend and you come into the office on the Monday, what could I say, should I do to make you feel like you're seen and you're heard and you're valued?
I think just what you said, right, to a coworker that is a friend, you know, is just that. I'm here if you need to talk. If you don't need to talk, I'm here. You let me know what you need.
Mm,
And that's it. Not the, oh my gosh, how are you doing? Oh, did you see this? I think oftentimes the um, well-meaning folks will try to come in and do this very aggressive, like emotional, I'm here with you, I feel your pain. And I got to tell you, that um, is the most frustrating feeling in the world, to have someone who, especially someone who isn't a person of color, right? No matter how well meaning, to be like, oh my gosh, I totally understand why you're so, you don't. I mean, you just don't.
mm,
And I'm not expecting you to. It was really difficult at that time because I used to do DEI training. I used to do diversity, equity, and inclusion training. I don't anymore because emotionally it's just too much. And I was actually in a group at the time. I was doing DEI for a copywriting group, and it was predominantly white women that were in the group. And the awkwardness after that, the constant, like, "Oh, what can I do? What can I say? What can I do for you?" It was maybe more overwhelming
mm,
than the images that we all had to sit through, you
mm.
know? And, it was, for me, it was just really important that I had the space, to express how I was feeling, and that people heard me when I said, "Listen, I know that you're here. I know that you're in support. If I need anything from you, I will absolutely let you know. Thank you, but I need you to leave it there."
I think we should highlight for people as well. And it's not that we want to make them feel like they can't say something in support.
No,
So I don't
of
want
course.
people to get paranoid about saying the wrong thing, but we really need to make sure we're conscious about not making our offer of support about ourselves.
Right.
And I think if we can just leave the I out of it when we're offering that support, we might avoid accidentally making it about ourselves. I mean, that could be
Absolutely.
a takeaway from there. Why don't we raise it up a bit? So, we've looked at it from a colleague point of view. What if I was responsible in that organization, whether it's for HR or for policies around people and well-being? What are some things I should have or could have put in place that made it easier for people to manage their way through that period of time?
You have to start connecting with other people outside of your bubble. You have to start asking people what they need, what would be helpful, how can we frame conversations, and the work that you do. How can we make sure that we're supporting everyone and not just guessing,
Mm,
or not trying to go through, try to use that colorblind lens of creating one thing? Oh, it's everybody's got these same resources so that it's fair. That's not how it works,
mhm,
right?
yeah,
The world is not a fair place. Having any one group, whether it's HR, whether it's management, having this particular group in a silo make decisions on what's going to best support employees
mm,
is never the answer,
yeah.
right? You have to talk to the people that you are serving and the people who are working for you, and making sure that you're getting input, because we're not all, none of us live in a monolith. We don't represent any one particular group or set of groups. And you could ask 10 Black people the same question, you're going to get 10 different answers, right?
Yeah, so if I could interject there, that is absolutely right. And I want to really highlight that point on that is that you, Mel, you have identified as a whole bunch of things, not just the color of your skin. And so your
Yeah,
experience is interwoven with all those identities, which will be different to someone next to you that might look the same as you, but has a whole bunch of different identities. that make their
Yeah,
experience different in this world. And of course, consequently, their needs are different for them to thrive. I want to go back to a word you used,
sure.
colorblind.
Mm.
Now, I think this is a really good learning moment for people, where you'll often hear someone say, "Yeah, but I don't see you as," or "I just see you the same as me." Okay. Now, those of you not watching and only listening to this podcast, Mel's did the slow eye close and the nod. Okay, so Mel, can you explain to us how that feels when someone says that to you?
Ugh, it's terrible. And again, I get it. I get that it's easier that people feel like it's the right thing, but I don't want anyone to assume my experience about any sectionality that I fall into. Any box that I might fit into, there is no one else on this planet that has my experience, that feels what I feel from moment to moment. And so to assume that you know how I feel or what I'm going to think about a thing, it's outlandish and it's inappropriate, especially from a business perspective, for people to make those assumptions and to say, "Oh, well, I don't see color." You do see color.
Mm.
Unless you don't have sight, you see the color,
Mm,
and it impacts every decision that you make when you see me.
mm,
Subconsciously or not, it does. The way that we interact is different with different people.
mm,
That's just the reality. So it's almost like you are dismissing the work that needs to be done to recognize my difference from you.
mm,
And that's the piece that is upsetting.
yeah.
You are trying to get off the hook basically instead of just doing the work.
I want to sort of reinforce that for those that are listening, that when you do say that, maybe you forget, you kind of forget that there's someone that's a different color because they're your friend, and I get the cognitive thinking process of that. But when you say that, it's like you are erasing the history of the oppression and the barriers and the challenges that not just that person, but the people like them have had to overcome to this point and continue from here on out. And that's not nice. No.
It's not helpful in any aspect for you or for that person.
Yeah. So the point is, I see you. That's what we want to say.
Yeah.
I see you. Now that we're still talking about all these intersectionalities that make up Mel, you also identify as a religious minority. Can you help explain that to us?
So I live in the US and the majority religion here is Christianity. And so anyone who is not a Christian is going to fall into that category of minority. I did grow up in a Christian household and not like oppressively Christian. But certainly we were at church, and I am a Black woman who grew up in an all white household. So that's a whole nother conversation that we can have about intersectionality.
Yes.
But yes, I did grow up in a Christian family. And I think in general, growing up in the US, there's so much Christianity baked into everything, right? Baked into our laws, even though it's not how it's supposed to work, into our educational system, that it's just so normalized
Mm,
that you believe in this one God and that's it. Even if you don't go to church, that anything outside of that really makes people pause, like, oh,
being raised Christian, what
yeah.
was the impact of you coming out as gay in your family?
Well, I was an adult when I started dating my first girlfriend. I hesitate saying coming out because though I recognize it's necessary for many people to go through that experience of a formal coming out, if it can be avoided, I am a firm believer that you shouldn't have to come out. You should just talk about your life to people. And that's essentially what I did. Again, I was an adult, so I wasn't dependent on parents and things like that. I wouldn't say it had any impact it had to do with anything related to religion. I presented my first girlfriend as, "Hey, this is so and so, my girlfriend," and, I got some looks like, "Oh, oh, okay. Alright." Uh,
Yeah.
and that was kind of it. I hadn't created this environment where there's something wrong and I need to sit down and tell you about it,
Mm-hmm.
right? Which
Yeah.
oftentimes is how coming out comes across to people. So of course, when you frame it that way,
Mm.
people tend to think like, "Oh, there must be something wrong with this."
Yeah.
Huh. So really, the only deeper conversations I had were with my daughters. I have 2 daughters, and I already had them, and so I had conversations with them. I think they were like 11 and 13, and it really was, again, more presenting this person as my girlfriend now and asking them how they felt about that and so on, and, but yeah, there wasn't a, like, "I want your acceptance" from the general community. It was more informational.
I
Yeah.
love that. Just, and this is what it is. And let's
Yeah.
carry on.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I will say I was married before to a man long
Mhm.
ago, and there didn't need to be any conversations with people about it. And so I didn't feel the need personally. I mean, I'm kind of bossy anyways, but I didn't feel the need to have to create this other scenario of acceptance for people.
Mhm.
But as a parent, I think the biggest thing again is conversation, is having that open door, even for my girls, giving them the space to say how you feel one way or the other. And it's funny, I can remember my youngest daughter, I feel like before I even got it all the way out, was like, "I'm fine, mom, it's cool." And my oldest daughter, who is very thoughtful about a lot of things, she's like, "I'm not sure how I feel about that." And I said, "Okay, that's fine. We can talk about it as much as you need to." And the next day, when she has, some space, she said, Mom, I don't have any problem with you being gay. I just never had to think about my mom being before. So it just took me a minute, but I'm
Mm.
good."
And we
And
all have
and
different processing needs, right?
Absolutely. And I think that's the challenge, that we also can sometimes pressure people into giving you some definitive answer about a thing instead of letting them process. I mean, you had time to figure out who you wanted to date or not date, and, give people around you that same opportunity. Don't
Mm.
always expect the worst,
Yeah.
you know?
When you're in your family unit, and I know your kids are older now, right? Because you've got grandkids, but
Yes.
let's just create the picture of having two younger children, as you were describing, and your partner. Did you always feel like you were welcomed in places when you went together?
In general, I have a philosophy that everyone is my friend, they just don't know it yet. But I will say that my girlfriend at the time, her family was actually waiting for her to change her mind and just be straight. Her family probably made me feel the most uncomfortable of any other group of people, because it was just so obvious that they felt uncomfortable. They didn't like, their daughter slash granddaughter, being with this woman. And what did that look like for my friends and our neighbors? For me, again, I had the advantage of being an adult. I could just remove myself from those situations. When I first started dating my wife, her best friend, when I was going to be moving to Philadelphia to move in with her friend said, "She's gay all the time." Right, about me, right? Because I'm just, like, very open about who I am, and my wife at the time wasn't, she likes to say she was, but she really wasn't, out and open, about who she was, and so I had some insecurities
Mhm.
moving, to this new place and this person who, how is she gonna react? How is she, I can't not be me when we go out places. And so I was a little nervous at first. She never put me in any uncomfortable situation, and eventually, she got over it. But it was a bit of a learning curve, I think, for
Mhm.
her, because she really hadn't been around a lot of very openly gay people. And so there weren't conversations being had, and she was okay with that. She was in a nice little mellow groove of, like, don't ask, don't tell type of thing.
I mean, that does put a lot of anxiety on you, particularly when you were uprooting and moving to somewhere else.
But she had some really great coworkers that intervened in a couple of times where they could see, like, she didn't know what to say or something. And then after that, she was just like, yeah, she's great.
Yeah.
And I think once she got over that hurdle,
Yeah.
it made it a lot easier. Again, she was in the police department, so there's still a lot of stigma there, especially as a supervisor and things like that. But once she realized that the world didn't stop turning when she acknowledged it, it was like, oh, okay, this isn't that bad.
So what are some examples? You said some colleagues intervened. Did some people make it clear that it was a safe space?
The first time that we went out, her district was having like a going away party for someone. And he actually asked, "Oh, how long have you and Sarge been together?" Right? And, again, there hadn't been any conversations, but it was obvious, right?
Mhm.
And so one of her co-workers saw her just completely lose all the color in her face. And I remember she came over and like, "Come on, you need another drink. Leave Sarge alone." And so they just kind of pulled her out of that scenario so that she could compose herself. Even though she had never really talked about it with folks, she then felt like, "Oh, well, people do know,
Mm,
even if I'm not talking about it and they're all okay with it.
yeah.
Oh, so maybe this wasn't such a big deal to talk about it after all."
If we do know, and we kind of, you can kind of tell when someone's just not sure about whether or not they can disclose themselves. So just
Yeah.
make it normal. So that person just normalize and says, "So how long have you guys been together?"
Right.
Right? Just
Yeah.
making it so normal.
Yeah.
Or if you can't do that bit, talk about your gay friends or talk about show that you actually are okay with it in other ways as well to make sure that that person feels safe.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there are a lot of opportunities to do that, and yeah, to your point, I mean that just like, "Oh yeah, how long have you guys been together?" Or because guess what? If you're not actually together, people are going to be like, "Oh no. Ooh, oh no, we're not together."
Yeah.
It's not offensive,
No.
right? If it's not true,
Yeah.
but when it is true, then it's like, "Oh, okay, and he doesn't even care. He's so regular about it," right? And I think it can be that way with so many scenarios, just
Mm,
making people feel more comfortable and not avoiding having conversations,
yeah.
or trying to like, "Oh, is that your girl? Oh, friend is,"
What
like
do I
not
say?
editing yourself.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now you mentioned you grew up in an all-white family. Okay.
Yes, I like to joke that I'm the black sheep of the family. So, my mother is white and
Yeah.
my father is black. So
Okay.
my father wasn't in the household growing up,
Mhm.
but my mother had previously been married to a white man, and I have a brother and a sister who
Right.
they're all white, right? And so I am the only black person that grew up in the household. For me, that is these conversations around diversity and inclusion and equity and what does that look like before all those letters existed in
Mm,
trainings is just kind of baked into who I am because there's always been these glaring differences, right? I couldn't not look in the mirror and see somebody who doesn't look like the rest of the people in my house. We never had a conversation that I can think of in my household around race.
mm.
And my sister, dated black men. My brother dated Spanish women. It was like the UN constantly in our house. And it was just like that was normal.
How
So
do you think it affected the way you saw yourself or your identity, how you found your place in the world? Do you think it had any effect?
for a long time, I mean, a long time, well into my adulthood, I never felt black enough for black people, right? But I was obviously too black for white people.
Mhm.
Right? Growing up, I was more comfortable with white friends, and in high school, you'd see like me, like this little chocolate drop in the middle of this, all these white kids. I always just felt more accepted, and I'm sure that's because again, that was kind of my comfort zone, was being around all these white people in my household. I was told many times by especially Black girls that I went to school with, like, oh, you think you're white, or, oh, you've got that good hair, and so you think you're better than us. And I'm just like, I don't know what I could do with this hair. Sorry. Like I can't be somebody else. And I never got those pressures from my white friends. And
Mhm.
I don't know if it was because they just avoided the conversations altogether and were just like, whatever, she's like us. Come on over. She listens to the same music and wears the same clothes or whatever. And so it really wasn't until I was well into my adulthood before I had any like Black female friends.
I'm sorry you felt that and had to go through that.
Yeah.
Um, I know, I mean, I've never felt like I've belonged anywhere, but I always felt ostracized at school as well.
Hmm.
Um, and I think a lot of people can empathize with that feeling. And I often encourage people to remember what that felt like at any point in your schooling. If you ever felt left out, like you didn't belong, like you had no one to play with or sit with,
Yeah.
that's kind of what exclusion feels like for someone.
Yeah,
Right? Like
absolutely.
if we can tap back into feeling that, then we know what exclusion feels like for people that are underrepresented.
Yeah.
Yeah, so thank you for sharing that.
Yeah. But I will say just a caveat to that is unfortunately a lot of people go to the other extreme. This is usually the extremists of the group, um, tend to be the folks who were also completely
Yeah,
ostracized. And
okay.
now they found this group again of extreme personalities that they're like, yeah, I'm now in the power group. Let's beat up on, this other group. And
Perhaps my
and it's
naivety and compassion for people makes me forget that. I
yeah,
would like to think we would use that empathy for good, not evil.
in a perfect world,
Yes.
yes.
Yeah. But thank you for highlighting that point as well.
Yeah.
Let's say there's someone like you, Mel, in my workplace. How do I best make you feel like you belong and that you can thrive at work?
I'll go back to the having conversations, just asking,
Mm,
not assuming,
yeah.
and recognizing and acknowledging like I'm going to screw this up sometimes.
Mhm.
Please let me know when I do. I found this a lot when I used to work at a university and we had, foreign exchange students and things like that, and people with like difficult names. Names are so important to get right. And so many people will just like butcher someone's name and be like, oh, well, you know who I'm talking about. No, no, I need you to back all the way up and let's get this right.
Mm,
And so, again, just acknowledging if I mispronounce your name, please tell me how to say it correctly and keep doing it till you get it right, but not belabor the point that you screwed up like, "Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry," 20 times. "I'm sorry, I got your pronouns wrong. Tell me what they are. Thank you. I will try to do my best to remember that next time," and move on. You know, don't let that insecurity and that nervousness override potential friendships,
mm.
or being a resource for people.
Yeah. Don't get paralyzed by the desire to get it perfect,
Yeah.
right? Any leader that shows that vulnerability and authenticity, that I'm actively and visibly going to make an effort for inclusion. But
Yeah.
I'm also saying, I know I'm probably going to get it wrong. So please tell me when I do, and I will do what I can to fix it.
Yeah.
Um, that in itself is a really good sign of inclusive leadership.
Yeah, and so powerful to hear, don't you think?
Mm,
If you're in a workplace and you have a boss who's very masculine presenting and very kind of type A and and if they were to come to you and say that, wouldn't you feel like, "Oh my gosh,
you
great, because
kind
I
of feel
got
like
this, yeah, because
breathe
I got
out.
this vibe. I knew you were going to screw it up, but you
Yeah.
acknowledged it, and so that means a lot."
And that translates well beyond just inclusion, right? It makes it safe
Oh,
to fail
certainly.
at work. And, I mean,
Right.
there's a whole
Yeah.
bunch of benefits to employee engagement and performance with that
Yeah.
authenticity. But that's a whole nother podcast because today is about inclusion.
Yes.
Mel, how are you bringing your amazingness to this world at the moment?
But I started a company where I focus on personal development training called WTF with Mel. And the WTF stands for a couple of things, but it gets people talking. And so that's why I have never changed it. But I primarily work with women and queer communities, and I help them overcome these limiting beliefs that we have because we're in these little boxes. So I really focus on unusual intuitive tools like tarot and astrology and meditation and things like that, that
Mhm.
again are not things that we talk about nearly enough in our everyday world. And they really make such a difference with helping people figure out who they are.
Brilliant. I'm sure lots of people will resonate with that. And we're going to put all your details in the details of the podcast episode so that people can get in contact with you. Thank you so much for contributing today. It was a joy to have a chat.
Yeah, this has been wonderful. I'm excited to hear all the stories of all the people that you have coming up on the show, and this is really important, I think, for so many people to hear and have the opportunity to hear different voices that they wouldn't normally. So thank you again.
Thanks again.